The year is 1789. The United States are 8 years removed from defeating Great Britain in the Revolutionary War and are now free to govern themselves however they choose. While everyone was ecstatic about their newly found freedom, one man with governmental power knew that in order for that freedom to last, the country would need a stable economy to avoid bankruptcy. That man was Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's dream for America was to create a strong enough economy to raise the national debt using trade and manufacturing. However, conflict to this dream arose in the form of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, two men who would constantly stand in Hamilton's way. Hamilton would have to create a compromise with them in order to achieve his dream. And during the year 1776, America was in flux. Americans had become fed up with Britain's taxing and the amount of power that they held over them. They wanted change, so they decided to rise up and overthrow the British government. For a period of 8 years, Americans fought hard against the British behind General George Washington. Washington, who used to fight for the British, helped America push out the British, and just like that, America was an independent nation. The Americans celebrated their victory, but most of them didn't know that even though they had won the war, there was still much work to be done. Between the war and the fact that they no longer had Britain to rely on, America had a huge debt that could ruin the country before it even began. On top of that, very few people in America knew how to replace British government with their own form of government. Many people wanted a form of government where everyone had a say, a democracy. The problem with this government was that, due to the fact that almost no places in the world had a democratic government, America would have to create this system from scratch. Despite all these problems and hiccups in their way, Americans felt that if they could be the most powerful country in the world, anything was possible. But in 1789, America was just a country in huge debt and an unproven government. Their old constitution, the Articles of Confederation, had just failed due to the inability to solve the problems that plagued the young nation, especially the national debt. Americans were hoping that the new constitution and George Washington, who had been elected president that year with no real competition, could help right the ship that was America. To do this, Washington created a cabinet of people to help him do his duty. This cabinet included Edmund Randolph, the Attorney General, Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury and the only member who was approved unanimously by the United States Senate. Alexander Hamilton had the toughest job of any of the cabinet members. Hamilton was given the economic keys to a country with not a lot of money and an economy that was a few bad moves away from bankruptcy. This could be seen as both good and bad. It could turn out bad because with not a lot to go off of and no form of strategy in place, one might not know what to do and the economy would crumble. On the other hand, it meant that Hamilton could choose to create a system in any way he wanted to and, excluding the guidelines of the Constitution set for the federal government, didn't have to go by anyone's rules on how to run it, which is exactly what Hamilton did. He decided that he would try to create an economy based on his beliefs that he felt would not just erase the debt, but also make America extremely wealthy. His primary belief was that the government needed to be able to control the finances in order for the country to survive. Using his belief and the Bank of England as two examples, he came up with an idea that was by far his biggest accomplishment as Secretary of Treasury, the idea of a U.S. national bank. His idea for the bank was that it would collect the taxes and give them to the government, which in turn meant that the government had more money to be able to tackle more expensive tasks like expansion or trade. However, the Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson did not agree with Hamilton's policies. He believed that the bank would make the federal government too powerful and that the state governments would lose lots of power. Another thing Jefferson used as backing to his side of the argument was that the idea that the bank went against the Constitution. The Constitution said that no bank could be used to regulate trade with anyone, which is what Hamilton intended for the bank to do. Jefferson said that allowing this to pass would mean the Congress would break down the most ancient and fundamental laws of several states. Jefferson's idea of strict interpretation of the Constitution, the idea that no secondary opinions were allowed about the Constitution, was what drove his fire that the bank proposal should not be passed by Congress. Jefferson also seemed to have most of Congress on his side. Hamilton knew that he must come up with a compromise with Jefferson to get what he wanted. Hamilton also knew that the long-term future of where the U.S. Capitol would be was uncertain. Hamilton decided to use this as leverage. He offered Jefferson and James Madison, Jefferson's right-hand man, that he would write up a bill moving the U.S. Capitol permanently to the Potomac River, which was near where the two lived. In exchange, the two men would hold a vote trading. This was, plainly, when Madison and Jefferson traded votes with congressmen who originally disagreed with Hamilton, which meant that Madison and Jefferson agreed to take the congressman's stand on another issue if he changed his vote. After the vote trading took place, Hamilton's side now had significantly more votes. The proposal passed and was given a 20-year charter. The U.S. now had a national bank. The passing of Hamilton's bill had many effects, both short and long-term. To this day, the United States Capitol is still where Hamilton and Jefferson agreed upon back in 1790. Additionally, the whole process drove a wedge between Jefferson and Hamilton that would never be fixed. The idea of strict versus loose interpretation of the Constitution would end up creating political parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The bank itself proved to be successful for a while. After being opened in 1791, it had a great 20 years. In 1811, however, the bank began to stir up a little controversy. Alexander Hamilton was dead, and the Federalist Party had lost most of its power now that James Madison, the second straight Republican president, was in power. This meant that the bank had lost lots of its support, and with even more state banks being added, the necessity for a national bank was called into question, and James Madison eventually persuaded Congress to not renew the charter. The bank was closed until 1816, when Congress reopened it. However, during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, the bank was the center of attention for not great reasons. Jackson, who was a strong believer in Jefferson's policies, hated the bank. With the bank due for a new charter, Jackson fought hard with Congress about whether or not to renew it. After his re-election, the charter ended and Jackson, after a long battle, eventually did not renew the charter, and the bank was closed for the final time. The Bank of America was very important for the short time it was around. It achieved Hamilton's goal of erasing national debt by regulating the coming and going of bonds, which is when someone can hold money for someone else to give to that person later. The larger a bond is, the more money that the bank gets. The bank ended up making $700,000 during its most successful years. Hamilton's dream for American economics came true, but not without its hiccups. He was able to overcome the conflict he had with Jefferson by creating the Compromise of 1790. He gave America Washington, D.C., and helped drag America out of the debt to become a very wealthy country based on how young it was. If Hamilton doesn't compromise with Jefferson and Madison, the bank would never have been created, which would have left America with massive debt issues and would have led to bankruptcy. This compromise and the bank in general are both huge parts of American history that are not talked about enough. Everyone talks about how Abraham Lincoln ended slavery and made America a better place, how the westward expansion that saw the likes of California and Arizona become popular, but if this compromise never happens, none of these great moments happen. The Compromise of 1790 and the National Bank saved America.